Hello, and welcome to our talk. We are Dmitry Tansur and Ilya Tengov. We work for Red Hat. We are on the OpenStack Ironic team. Our talk is called Bare Metal in the Cloud, isn't it ironic? In this talk, we're going to explain what the bare metal provisioning is and why it is becoming increasingly important these days. We will introduce you the Ironic project and its place on the cloud landscape, and it's working based on a trivial workflow example. In the end of this talk, we'll give you a glimpse of what the future holds for Ironic. The idea behind bare metal provisioning, bare metal allocation is simple. The idea is to let the cloud user to request and subsequently receive the bare metal machine, the physical machine, in the very same way as they do for virtual machines. The reasons for this desire are many. Just to name a few, some applications rely on hard to virtualize hardware like GPU or FPGA. Some applications deal with sensitive data and therefore require perfect tenant isolation for security reasons. Some applications just need raw computing power. Among all these reasons, one of the emerging one, I would say, is the desire to manage the cloud infrastructure itself. Because in the end, the cloud is a software and it is running on the bare metal. And when you have a large cloud, a large set of computers, automating all things bare metal, all things deployment makes a huge win. The Ironic project is a bare metal provisioning or orchestration agent service. It's a web service. It's API driven. It's shipped with the CLI and graphical user interfaces. It's quite old. It's been around for around 5 or 4 years. It's been used by many cloud operators around the world. That probably explains why it has quite active and diverse upstream community and many contributors. Besides that, being a hardware management tool, Ironic enjoys deep and wide vendor support. Vendors join the upstream effort. They contribute their drivers for their hardware to make their hardware compatible with Ironic. Ironic started its life as a fork of OpenStack Nova's bare metal driver. Since then, it has grown into a standalone, I would say, sophisticated tool. It can be used as a standalone tool for hardware provisioning for whatever purpose, or it can be used within OpenStack. In any of these configurations, the Ironic system consists of the orchestration agent called Ironic Conductor, the deployment agent, which is running inside the bare metal machine when deployed, and the RESTful API for communicating with the world. If Ironic is used within the OpenStack cloud, Nova has to have the Ironic driver. Oftentimes, or more often than not, the hardware, the servers designed for data center use, they are not just the motherboards. They are accompanied by a small satellite computer called BMC, Baseboard Management Controller. This computer is always up, it's always on the network, and most importantly, it has very intricate relationship with the main system. It can manage it in many different ways. Inside this BMC computer, there is an agent or software running to control it. This software is communicating with the world by means of a special designed hardware management protocol. There were many protocols in the past. The most modern, perhaps, and emerging protocol is called Redfish, and it is rapidly displacing the previous king, IPMI, and many other vendor-specific protocols. Because vendors are vendors. Everyone has to come up with its own protocol for that thing. BMC can do many things. The most important ones, I would say, is the ability to power cycle the system, that is to control power remotely, and changing boot configuration to boot system from at least from the network or from the local drive. More sophisticated BMCs can do magical things. They can change BIOS configuration on the machine. They can deal with hardware RAID configuration. They can use virtual media boot, which is a way to boot a machine from virtual CD with the image supplied by the operator, and many other things. We are going to explain how Ironic works based on a bare metal machine lifecycle. To make it more easier to explain, we separated this lifecycle into pieces: preparation, deployment, and the teardown. The preparation step starts with so-called inspection. Whenever Ironic becomes aware of the bare metal machine to manage, it can gather more information about it, meaning the hardware configuration capabilities of this machine, which is useful for scheduling, for picking the machine out of many, and possibly for inventory information, for putting this machine into the context of the whole data center inventory. Inspection can be done with Ironic. Inspection can be done in two ways. One is called out-of-band and the other in-band. The out-of-band inspection is based on communicating with the BMC. So Ironic goes out and talks to BMC and asks BMC, what kind of machine is this? What's its serial number? What is CPU? What kind of memory it has? The in-band inspection is performed by the Ironic agent running inside the RAM disk, which is booted into the machine being inspected. So Ironic boots this RAM disk, runs the Ironic agent, and then the orchestration agent, the Ironic conductor, talks to this embedded Ironic agent inside the machine and gathers all this information, all the above information. And beyond that, Ironic agent can run benchmarking. It can listen on the network for, say, LLDP frames to learn to which switch port this machine is connected, is plugged in. Once the inspection is over, the next step, which by the way can be run many times at different contexts, is known as cleaning. Cleaning can also be done in band and out of band ways. The idea of cleaning is to make sure that the machine being deployed is like new. It can be recycled from previous installation, but our goal here is to make sure that every time we deploy a new machine, it's the same. During the cleaning phase, what Ironic can do is to reset BIOS settings or apply new BIOS settings, reassemble the hardware RAID, update the firmware. These things are probably more often done out of band. With in-band cleaning, what we can do, we can wipe out local drives from inside, which is easy. We can sometimes deal with hardware or software RAIDs. It depends on the machine, on the hardware. By the end of this cleaning cycle, we have like new machine, factory reset machine. And with this, I'm passing mic to Dmitry.
Okay, now we have a pool of machines all cleaned, all ready for deployment, all more or less uniform. What happens when you deploy? Of course, you start with picking a bare metal machine for your deployment. Historically, we have been relying on the OpenStack compute service for this goal, but in the upcoming release, we're going to introduce our own API for picking a machine based on certain simple criteria, its class and its traits. Now that after you've picked the machine, the deployment starts. You connect it to the deployment network, which is a network where the deployment agent will run. You configure a boot of the deployment RAM disk via PXE, via virtual media. I'll go into some details a bit later. The deployment agent starts and orchestrated by the Ironic conductor. It does actions like partitioning the target device, flashing the image, configuring local boot, maybe some custom actions. When it's done, we disconnect the deployment network. We connect the networks that were requested for the instance. It may be one or more. We configure the booting of the final instance, again, net boot or local boot, and we reboot into the final instance. At this point, you can use it. Let's cover a few topics in depth. Networking. As I mentioned, we have two kinds of networks we operate with. We have service networks, which are used for cleaning, which are used for provisioning, for process code rescue, for inspection, and essentially anything that happens in band. And we have tenant networks that are the networks that you requested for your machines. And we have three network management models in Ironic. First, you can use your infrastructure. Of course, whatever you have in your data center, we can use it. You have to pre-configure the HTTP to boot the deployment RAM disk, and you have to request your instances with local boot. So every time they net boot, they get deployed. Every time they boot from local disk, you just get into instance. We have good cooperation with the OpenStack networking service called Neutron. We can use it in two modes. With shared network, when essentially for all networks are flat and are shared between different machines. In this case, we only use Neutron for DHCP options and for PXE configuration. And the most interesting of all of this, we can integrate with Neutron for advanced switch management. In this case, we can ask Neutron to put ports to switch ports to which the machine is connected to on different VLANs, essentially allowing integration with virtual machines running on OpenStack compute, allowing tenant isolation, allowing isolation between service and tenant networks, which is quite important to make sure, for example, your tenants cannot access your control plane and cannot access each other. As to the boot configuration, I mentioned PXE, which is an old technology based on TFTP protocol. And when you provide HTTP options for your machine to boot from certain network location, we support iPXE, which is an improvement on PXE using HTTP instead of less reliable TFTP. More interesting, as Ilya mentioned, we support virtual media, which allows Ironic to talk to the BMC to instruct it to boot your machine from an ISO image located on HTTP, CIFS, or NFS share. Ironic has a quite decent support of UEFI, including support for secure boot in certain scenarios. We also support hybrid bias and UEFI images. We support creating partitioning table for UEFI and for bias, including some rare cases like using GPT with bias, with legacy boot, sorry. When we deploy the images, again, we have several options. They all orchestrated using this Ironic agent running in-band on the machine and a temporarily in-memory RAM disk. The old way was for the agent to create an iSCSI target and for conductor to connect to this target and to flash the image. Newer, more reliable way, which we have supported for quite some time, is for the agent to pull the image via HTTP from your HTTP server or from the OpenStack Swift servers. It can do in-memory conversion, but if the image is a raw image already, we can stream it directly to the block device, allowing any to skip any caching in memory. This is quite efficient. We are looking into supporting BitTorrent to simplify simultaneous boot of many machines with large, heavy images over maybe less reliable network. So if you're interested in this, come contribute. We need help. Other features that I'm not going to go into details are firmware updates for certain vendors, serial console support for your Ironic instances, rescue mode, which you can boot a RAM disk right from your instance. And for example, if you need to repair it because it does not boot anymore, you can boot a RAM disk, SSH into it, mount the disks, do any reparation, and then return the instance into operation. We support port groups, which is port bonding essentially. And the thing we are working on are a thing called deploy templates, which is a very interesting way to run the same preparational steps we use for cleaning, like building RAID, but during deploy time on demand. For example, a user of the OpenStack compute will be able to say, build me RAID, get me an instance with this RAID template. and you'll get it, and Ironic will automatically build this RAID for you and return an instance with RAID already built. Then you will not need to have a pool of machines with specific RAID or bias or any configuration. And we are working on graphical consoles, essentially allowing you to VNC into your instance. We're also researching new use cases where we would certainly like your input on hyperconverged infrastructures and container engines, which use Ironic as a satellite service for scaling up, scaling down of installation. I know people are working on Kubernetes integration for Ironic, for example, as a I forgot the term, but yeah, for essentially as part of the cluster API. We are looking at edge architectures and various approaches to make Ironic work better in highly distributed, geographically distributed environments, including attempts to improve attempts of federation of Ironic across geographical locations. And that's it. Come learn more from our documentation. It's quite extensive. Come talk to us. We have a mailing list, OpenStack Discuss. Come talk to our RC channel. We are very friendly. We don't bite. Of course, we welcome contributions. We have a very active community. We like to review your code. We want to hear about your use cases. It's quite important for us to know what people would like to use Ironic for, how they would like to use it. That will allow us to plan our features next. Any questions?
With UEFI, it's kind of complicated to have the system boot to the CD because you have to change the boot variables.
So how does Ironic boot when we have UEFI ISO? So as far as I remember, there is an option, and it's actually used on installation ISOs of other Linux distributions to create a universal directory /boot/ I forgot, but
How not to boot what is installed? Like how you tell the machine to boot?
How to not boot what is already installed. So all BMCs allow the feature, it's exposing APMI, retrieving everything to configure the boot sequence. It's possible in legacy mode, it's possible in UEFI. It's sometimes different in these modes, but we abstract it all for you. So we tell it to boot from network or boot from virtual media, this ISO, or boot from local disk. We can control that, yes.
What do you do regarding firmware? Like, how do you make sure that reverse tenant of the hardware didn't install like a backdoor there on some device?
That's a big pain point for, yeah, sorry. How do we make sure that the tenant didn't mess up the firmware? This is a difficult topic, and essentially, I know that public cloud providers who use or used to use Ironic, yes, there are public cloud providers who use Ironic, they cooperated with vendors to make sure that it's not possible. Because it's kind of like catch-22 here. We can update firmware from Ironic, we can reset bias, but if something from inside already messed it up, it can just ignore our request. So there's no like golden pill here. If you tenants are completely untrusted, you have to cooperate with vendors to make sure you can disable this messing up the firmware from within.
But we trust the vendors on this.
Yeah, sometimes.
I have a question. How is it feasible or easy those days to actually deploy Ironic without OpenStack?
Is it possible to deploy Ironic with OpenStack? Yes, it is. It has been possible for quite some time, and we're working on improving that. For example, I'm working to make the dependency on RabbitMQ as a medium optional, and I have a patch for that. There is a project called Bifrost, which allows deploying Ironic without OpenStack. You can deploy Ironic with some OpenStack bits, pick Keystone and Neutron, but without glance, using HTTP locations. But yes, it's very possible, and we're very interested in the people doing that and giving feedback. I don't hear you, I'm sorry. Yeah, of course, HTTPS is also supported, and you can provide custom certificates for that. And HTTP proxy settings as well.
With regard to the introspection, I see some similarities with the FOSDEM project. what are the contradictions?
Similarities and contradictions with Foreman project. So I haven't looked in Foreman in depth, to be honest. There are certainly quite some overlap in provisioning part. I think less overlap in lifecycle part. As far as I know, like bias and this, all the things about returning instance. So our mission is a bit more towards serving bare metals to clients, like in a bit of a cloud approach, even without OpenStack still, and like API-driven, uniform with because of the cleaning features. I think Foreman is a bit more like tied to a cyclic installation approach, but again, pardon my ignorance, I'm maybe missing something in this.
Yes, for choosing the bare metal node, are you planning to reuse placement project or are you planning to develop your own code for that?
So whether we plan to use the OpenStack placement service for picking a bare metal node? Both. The answer is both. The work I'm doing allows two backends for this, we call it allocation API. It can be database-based for the case when people don't want to use placement, but my next plan is to use placement as well because it will allow Ironic standalone API to be used without conflicts with the Nova Compute API on the same set, on the same pool of bare metal nodes. So yes, we plan on that. Contributions welcome, by the way. Anything?
You get a lot of jokes about the Ironic name.
Do we get a lot of jokes about Ironic name? Oh yeah, and we make a lot of jokes about Ironic. Isn't it ironic? Anything else?
You heard of digital rebar at all? No? Maybe it's more like Foreman.
I think it's more from the life
Yeah.
cycle and not only OpenStack.
Yeah, the question is about some project. Unfortunately, I cannot hear the name.
Digital rebar.
Digital rebar. No, I haven't heard about that. Okay, if no questions, then thank you. Come talk to us.